Well, good afternoon, all of you in Europe, UK, and Africa, and good evening to those of you in the Far East and India and Australia, and good morning to those of you who are still in early part of the day in the North Americas and South America. Welcome to ICMDA webinar number 255. I'm Howard Lyons. I'm Treasurer and a UK trustee based in London with the ICMDA. I suppose as Treasurer, it's okay for me to say that I'm very grateful for all your donations to the work of ICMDA. And if you do enjoy these webinars, then feel free to contribute where you have the opportunity on the website. All these are free, and the speakers always give their time for free, which we greatly appreciate. And of course, today is a topic that is something that we've all been affected by, so very broad appeal. And we also have an expert speaker in Annelies Wilder-Smith, who's spoken to us before and guided us through the COVID crisis with her wise wisdom and knowledge. But the topic today is one that, as I say, has a broad appeal. You could say that it was through COVID that ICMDA started these webinars and we couldn't actually meet face to face. So we're looking at the worldwide impact, the lasting impact of COVID. And in Annelies Wilder-Smith, we have one of the world's leading experts. She's devoted her career to emerging infectious diseases, is a specialist in COVID, but also a specialist in dengue fever. She looks particularly at those impacts on low and middle income countries. As a member of a medical family with a husband who's a professor in neurology and two children who are doctors in training, she knows all about the kind of concerns that you will all have about this particular topic. So without more ado, over to you, Annelies.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Howard. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today to speak about the lessons we've learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, the challenges we faced, and where we go from here. Remember March 2020? The world came to a standstill. Empty streets, airports closed, families separated. A little virus reshaped our lives. The crisis tested our resilience, our leadership, and our public health systems. COVID wasn't the first pandemic, and it won't be the last. The Bible speaks of plagues throughout history, often as judgment, as seen in Deuteronomy and Exodus. Psalms warns of the pestilence that stalks in darkness, perhaps alluding to unseen viruses. The Mosaic Law outlines how to manage infectious diseases. Pestilences are also cited as signs of the end times in Luke and Matthew. There will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. That in mind, I think we will see more outbreaks and pandemics in the future, possibly coming at ever shorter intervals. So COVID-19 was not the worst pandemic in our generation, or maybe other way, COVID-19 was the worst pandemic in our generation, but it certainly was not the worst in history. The Black Death in the 14th century killed up to 200 million people, wiping out nearly 60% of Europe's population. You have to imagine that. The 1918 Spanish flu claimed around 40 million lives, more than both world wars combined. I personally spent 18 years in Singapore and found myself as a frontline healthcare worker during the 2003 SARS outbreak, which took, sadly, the lives of many of my close friends and colleagues. It was terrifying. I remember walking through the eerily empty hallways of the hospital, out of breath because of my N95 mask, and then a news flashed up on TV about the Iraq invasion. It felt like the end times, gloomy, apocalyptic. And that sense of doom was common also during COVID. It doesn't mean COVID alone marked the end times. I think that is what we should always stress. The sense of doom and gloom is a natural emotional response to any outbreak or to any pandemic or other disaster. And no, SARS did not just disappear by itself. And lately, I've been hearing this false claim. SARS was contained because of relentless, stringent, strict public health efforts. We broke every chain of onward transmission. Each patient was isolated. Thousands were mobilized for contact training. We even mobilized the military to enforce contact tracing. Strict quarantines for all contacts were implemented. And we took these measures until no further cases were observed. And then we waited for 2 times the incubation time before we relaxed. The strategy was called circuit breaker, a term later reused during the COVID outbreak in Singapore. In the end, SARS caused about 8,000 cases and 774 deaths, and was limited to a few countries: Singapore, Hong Kong, China, and Canada. That trauma, though, left a mark. When COVID struck in 2020, countries with SARS experiences responded faster and more effectively than many in Europe or the US. These triangles here on the viral loads explain why we were able to contain SARS, but not COVID. SARS patients were only infectious after symptoms appeared. COVID was different. It spread before symptoms emerged. So by the time someone fell ill, they'd already infected others, making the successful traditional tracing impossible that we used for SARS. So the only option left was to quarantine then everyone. And today, quarantining everyone is better known as under the term of lockdown. So here's the global COVID-19 tally as of June 15, 2025. Over 700 million cases reported, though we know this is a massive undercount. Seroprevalence studies show that 98% of the world have been infected, so at least 7.5 billion infections must have occurred worldwide. Official deaths stand at 7 million. But again, due to under-testing and under-reporting, plus some indirect excess deaths, the true toll is thought to be between 16 to 22 million. Almost every country adopted wide-ranging public health and social measures to flatten the curve. They included social distancing, stay-at-home orders, school and workplace closures, travel bans, mask mandates. Over 100 types of such measures were documented, with each country applying its own mix and its own intensity. The Oxford Stringency Index tracked these policies worldwide, and the evidence is clear. Stricter measures were linked to fewer deaths and less pressure on health systems. And if you're interested, this Oxford Stringency Index is publicly available, and you can have a look at it. Masks weren't perfect, but they allowed some limited reopening. Perhaps the most painful measure was school closures. WHO advised reopening schools by 2021, but many countries kept schools closed longer than necessary. Ultimately, vaccines were the only clear path out of these devastating lockdowns, and Israel was the first country to show that there is a way out through reaching high vaccine coverage rates. They were the first to introduce a vaccine by negotiating a special deal with Pfizer at the time for early access to millions of doses in exchange for detailed safety and effectiveness data that they would deliver. Their rapid vaccine rollout and rapid vaccine and population coverage during lockdowns was truly remarkable. Cases dropped dramatically once high coverage was reached and remained low, even when relaxing the lockdown measures. So this is inspiring and was inspiring for us. And the aim then, of course, was to vaccinate the entire world. The faster, the earlier we would be able to get out of lockdowns. COVAX was launched in April 2022, even before vaccines became available, to ensure and to promote fair vaccine access worldwide. However, the reality was that high-income countries struck private bilateral deals with manufacturers, bypassing COVAX, thus leaving COVAX short on supplies for low-income nations. Still, by 2022, COVAX had delivered over 1 billion doses to 144 countries. And by 2023, and this is the slide you see here at 2024, most of the world had received at least one vaccine dose, a triumph against all odds. This was the biggest vaccine rollout ever in history. At one point, over 200 COVID-19 vaccine candidates were in development, and eventually about 11 vaccines using 4 different platforms were widely deployed. Many assume that the mRNA vaccines were the most widely used, but that's actually not true, at least not initially. In 2021, the AstraZeneca vaccine, the UK-produced vaccine, was the primary vaccine for most low and middle-income countries. The AstraZeneca vaccine didn't require ultra-cold storage and was more affordable than our mRNA vaccines, and therefore was the vaccine of choice in low to middle-income countries. This vaccine alone, AstraZeneca has saved about 6 million, and altogether, the estimates are that vaccine have saved 15 to 20 million lives. Of course, in the early days of vaccine rollout, we faced many unknowns. With limited supplies, some countries had no other choice but to mix and match vaccine types or vaccine platforms, or they had to delay the second dose out of necessity. Initially, we had to take some well-calculated risks informed by world-leading experts. And these decisions, in fact, later proved beneficial. So heterologous schedules, or the mix and match, actually showed better immune responses. Delaying the second dose lowered risks like myocarditis and improved effectiveness. And these data were shared with WHOs, particularly from countries like the UK and Canada, and they've really driven some of the WHO policies. Pregnancy posed another dilemma. As you know, any phase 3 trial typically excludes pregnant women. Yet COVID during pregnancy increased the risk of severe complications to the mother, ICU admissions, deaths both to women and the neonates. But we knew none of the COVID vaccines were live vaccines, and the reproductive toxicology studies showed safety. So again, we took a well-calculated risk based on expert advice, and post-introduction studies showed how safe COVID-19 vaccines were during pregnancy. The safety of COVID-19 vaccines obviously has received a lot of attention by the popular press as well as the scientific community. With over 14 billion doses administered, we now have the largest vaccine safety data set in history on a vaccine. One study, which is shown here, involving 99 million people, also an incredible sample size, attempted to quantify the risk of serious adverse events. Risks were assessed using observed versus expected ratios, OE, and the lower bound of the 95% confidence interval, LBCI, greater than 1.5 were reported. So the AstraZeneca vaccine was associated with higher risk of Guillain-Barré syndrome and, very concerningly, clotting disorders. These clotting disorders were due to thrombosis with thrombocytopenia, a syndrome causing serious cerebral venous thrombosis. Truly a devastating adverse event. Fortunately, it was rare. The mRNA vaccines were associated with slightly increased myocarditis risk, usually after the second dose, mostly in young men, generally mild and resolving fully in most cases. For every vaccine, regulators and health authorities carefully evaluate the benefits and risks. A vaccine is only approved for use when the benefits clearly outweigh the risks. This was also the case for AstraZeneca vaccine. While a serious adverse event, the cerebral venous thrombosis, was identified, the risk was extremely low. In contrast, the risk of severe illness or death from COVID without vaccination was very high, especially during the peak of the pandemic. So how do you communicate this to the public? I think this chart here is helpful. This chart illustrates the difference. The blue dots show the ICU admissions prevented by the vaccine. The orange dots show the harms associated with the vaccine. And you see that the benefit-risk ratio is always greatest where the incidence is highest and is always in favor of the vaccine. The benefit is highest in older persons and highest during a high incidence period like peak periods of the outbreak. The AstraZeneca vaccine, despite this really unfortunate, devastating, rare adverse event, is thought to have prevented 6 million deaths. Altogether, estimates suggest that COVID-19 vaccines prevented between 14 to 20 million deaths worldwide in the first year of vaccination alone. We do not lack data on vaccine safety in pregnancy. In fact, for COVID-19, we now have the largest data set on vaccination during pregnancy of any vaccine to date. Here's a link. I've shown here a link to a recent presentation by the US CDC, I think done about 2 weeks ago. One of the clearest and most thorough I've seen. It's publicly available. I encourage you to listen to the full talk. In short, the evidence is clear. There is no increased risk, neither for mothers nor for their babies. With high population immunity levels, the public health emergency is now over. While deaths are still occurring at low rates, it is still circulating and we still have to deal with it. So what are the future scenarios? 3 scenarios that we have been discussing. 1, best case scenario. Future variants are significantly less severe, vaccine effectiveness is maintained, and periodic boosting is not required. That would be the best case scenario. The worst case is a severe variant emerges again, requiring new mass vaccination with new formulated vaccines. The base case is the virus keeps evolving, resulting in lower vaccine effectiveness and requiring periodic boosting for high-risk groups. And so currently, we are in this base case scenario. So what were the triumphs of our response to the COVID pandemic? One undeniable triumph was the speed of vaccine development in order to get us out of lockdown. Never before have vaccines been developed and deployed so rapidly, about 365 days from sequencing the virus to vaccination, to the start of vaccination campaigns. And this was not because we cut corners. This was the result of decades of groundwork by groups, including the establishment of CEPI. CEPI is the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation. It was also the result of prior research on mRNA technology. In fact, mRNA technology was over 20 years in the making. It was also due to the unprecedented global collaboration that we've seen in 2020-21 and the greatest government funding ever on any vaccine. mRNA technology in particular revolutionized vaccine development because this platform allows rapid scalability. But we could and we should go faster next time. What if we could stop the next pandemic before it even starts? Had vaccines been available in 100 days, we could have saved an additional 8.3 million lives and $14 trillion in economic losses. So the 100-day mission is now the global goal. Reaching that goal, the 100 days mission, requires a paradigm shift, especially with regards to investing in significant front-loading in preparedness. We need to develop prototype vaccines before outbreak happens. So platforms and prototype vaccines. This also includes ensuring manufacturing readiness in advance and building rapid response networks and infrastructures. And then once an outbreak is confirmed, the virus is known, then the 100-day clock starts. And this is, again, not about cutting corners. Think of a Formula One pit stop. Let me use that as an example to illustrate it. Decades ago, changing the tires on the race car could take 5 minutes, slow, clumsy, and uncoordinated. But today, with careful planning, precision tools, and relentless practice, a full tire change at Formula One takes just a few seconds. And it's not just faster, it's better, safer, and more reliable. That's exactly how we need to think about pandemic vaccine development. Speed doesn't have to mean compromise. Just like in Formula One, it can mean just preparedness. But to make the 100-day mission happen requires political will, major funding, and commitment now. Alongside triumphs, we've also seen painful failures. Misinformation spread faster than science. Social media became a battlefield of facts and falsehoods. Distrust of governments and health agencies were the result. Fragile healthcare systems, even advanced hospitals, crumbled under pressure, exposing gaps in staffing, PPE, access to oxygen, and ICU capacity. Also, we've seen that healthcare systems that prioritize individual care over preventative or public health programs also fared poorly. Countries that had invested in contact tracing and community measures actually fared better. Deepening inequalities. Wealthier nations secured vaccines first. Remote work was a privilege not available to all. Global collaboration possible but difficult. Scientists collaborated across borders. I must say, I really enjoyed that in those years when I was part of this whole process. There was openness. We shared at an unprecedented speed. But political tensions, vaccine nationalism, and uneven policy responses hindered a truly unified approach. Pandemic communication is always tough. When cases are high, people comply with government-imposed government measures. But when measures succeed and therefore cases drop, people start crying for a relaxation of the lockdown measures, not realizing that relaxation will quickly bring us back to a high number of cases. It's like a pot with boiling water. Lift the lid and the water spills over. And this paradox made communication extremely difficult. The pandemic response often felt like navigating between Scylla and Charybdis, that ancient myth or the mythological story of steering a ship between deadly cliffs on one side and a sea monster on the other. On one side, there were deaths and suffering from COVID itself if no restrictions were imposed. On the other, the severe consequences of lockdown, economic hardships, mental health crisis, and disruption to education. Every country tried to steer its own course, making difficult or different trade-offs. Some chose to accept more deaths to preserve the economy. Others prioritized saving lives, even at great economic and social cost. There was no easy route, just difficult choices under extreme pressure. But as all economists would say now, dealing with the pandemic first was always the solution also to dealing with the economics. What does the Bible say about such dilemmas? There isn't always a clear-cut answer, but Scripture does give us some wisdom to guide difficult decisions. Many Mosaic laws instructed the isolation of those with infectious diseases to protect the wider community. Isaiah 26:20 says, "Go home, my people, and lock your doors. Hide yourselves for a little while until the Lord's anger has passed." And Deuteronomy 30:19 reminds us, "Choose life so that you and your children may live." While the Bible does not give us a pandemic playbook, it repeatedly emphasizes protecting life, community responsibility, and compassion for the most vulnerable at a time of a crisis. Sadly, the complexity and nuance of pandemic decisions were often lost in the noise of public debate. Instead of carefully examining data and navigating wisely between the cliffs and the sea monsters, much of the conversation moved to social media, compressed into 50-word tweets, Facebook posts, or Telegram chats. What followed wasn't thoughtful discussion, but polarization. People were pushed into extreme camps, either for vaccines or against, leaving no room for nuance, no space for reasonable dialogue. And caught in the middle were the scientists, those trying to weigh evidence carefully, openly communicate uncertainties and acknowledging data limitations. That's how we work as scientists. But in the megaphone world of social media, calm and careful voices were often drowned out. Who decides what is truth? Science is a process. It works to grasp the whole picture, knowing that knowledge evolves and takes time. But social media often works differently, without training, expertise, or context. Many see only a tiny part of reality, just what fits in their limited view. It's like looking through a small hole in the wall and seeing rain, then shouting to the scientist who is seeing sunshine, "You lied to me. I can clearly see it's raining," without realizing there is a big, wide world of facts beyond this narrow hole of social media. This is the challenge. Science seeks to understand the full landscape. Social media often fixates on snapshots. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, the megaphone was largely taken over by social media. People like myself, those working in organizations like WHO, CDC, NIH, FDA, universities, we were caught off guard. We were unprepared for the sheer force of accusations, conspiracy theories, and misinformation spreading online. Many of us were suddenly cornered without the training or tools to effectively respond. At first, I'll admit, some of the bizarre claims circulating online made me laugh. They were so absurd, so obviously false, and disconnected from any facts. But very quickly, I realized this was no laughing matter. What began as fringe thinking soon spread into the mainstream, influencing millions and driving public distrust. And we were left scrambling, trying to figure out how to respond, not just to a virus, but to a flood of misinformation, the infodemic on top of the pandemic. Here are just some examples of the distortions and disinformation we faced. Many rumors played on words and fears to manipulate people. Take mRNA vaccines, for example. People began claiming these vaccines would alter your genes. Why? Because the term mRNA has this connotation, and it fed into fears about genetic manipulation. The truth, mRNA vaccines never enter the nucleus of the cell. They cannot interact with your DNA. To deliver the vaccine, lipid nanoparticles were added to help the mRNA enter the cell. But even that term, nanoparticles, triggered wild conspiracy theories about microchips and tracking devices. Suddenly, bizarre claims spread that Bill Gates were using vaccines to track the world through microchips in these vaccines. In reality, these lipid nanoparticles are nothing more than tiny fat droplets, essentially liquid fats like cholesterol. No chips, no tracking, just basic biology. Then there were fertility myths. Despite over 5 billion people vaccinated globally with more than 40 billion doses vaccinated, resulting in the largest vaccine safety database we have in history, some still claim that COVID vaccines cause infertility. There is zero evidence to support this. Sadly, religious disinformation also flourished. Some Hindu groups claimed vaccines contain cow's blood. Completely false, of course. Some ultra-Orthodox Jewish groups warned vaccines would cause homosexuality. Again, baseless. In certain Muslim circles, there were fears that vaccines were a Western plot to cause sterility. Also unfounded. And in some right-wing Christian groups, fear about end times was exploited. Some called vaccines the mark of the beast, claiming that taking a vaccine made you a traitor to Jesus. Honestly, I was left speechless. How could a vaccine designed to save lives be twisted into that? So why would people spread vaccine disinformation? Not all of it was intentionally evil. Some of it came from misunderstanding, fear, or simply being trapped in social media echo chambers. But for intentional disinformation, there were typically three main motives. One, money. Many people don't realize how profitable disinformation can be. One example, Alex Jones. Alex Jones is a far-right conspiracy theorist and media personality. He made $800,000 per day in 2022. His peak annual revenue was about between 50 million to 70 million in a year. His net worth more than $350 million. A small group of individuals were responsible for a disproportionately large share of COVID-19 vaccines disinformation during the pandemic. A 2021 report by the Center for Countering Digital Hate identified what they called the disinformation dozen, 12 individuals who were responsible for up to 65% of all anti-vaccine content shared on social media platforms, making millions of money. One of the 12 was Robert F. Kennedy. 2, to polarize. Some people love to polarize. I took some courses in personality types like the Enneagram and realized that some personalities, they just love to polarize. It gives them some sense of power and influence and self-worth, I guess. 3, politics. And of course, many weaponize vaccine disinformation to advance political agendas, dividing societies for personal or party gain. And this graph shows you the consequences of politicizing a virus. Viruses by nature are neutral, apolitical. They don't recognize borders or political parties. And to me, it really is, if you fight a pandemic, it should be a societal, all hands on deck approach, everyone pulling together. But unfortunately, COVID-19 became heavily politicized, most notably in the United States. And here's what happened. Blue areas, typically aligned with Biden, had higher vaccination rates. Red areas, Trump-supporting states, had lower vaccine uptake rates, all based on the rhetoric at the time. This graph itself is actually a beautiful, not beautiful, it's a tragic and natural experiment. It really shows that vaccines work. The blue states with higher vaccination rates had lower death rates. The red states with lower vaccination rates had higher death rates. All countries, by the way, proved to be highly vulnerable to disinformation and misinformation, not only the US. A 2020 study of the most viewed videos about COVID-19 on YouTube found that more than 43% of these videos contained misleading information. Words matter. Words have consequences. Misinformation and distrust have caused a sharp decline in routine vaccination. The consequences, measles cases have surged in multiple countries because immunization rates have fallen. The US, once declared measles-free, is experiencing a major outbreak as we speak. Worldwide, 100,000 children have died of measles in 2023 alone. Let that sink in. This isn't just a public health crisis, it's a societal failure. We have the tools in hand, we need to use it. Conspiracy theories and lies have real life consequences. And when we talk about pandemic preparedness, we often think about a new future vaccine. But I fear that the next crisis we face may not come from a new virus. It will be the return of old ones. This is the new reality we are facing today. On one side, scientists working hard in labs developing tools to save lives. On the other side, political rallies openly defying science, rejecting vaccines. And we need to face the truth. Pandemic preparedness isn't just a scientific challenge, it's a political one too. The political decisions being made today will decide how the world responds to the next crisis. And it isn't just a US problem. We are seeing budget cuts for global health across almost every high-income country. In Germany, the UK, the Netherlands, France, Italy, governments are cutting global health funding. Why? Because they're reallocating that money to military build-ups. There have been seismic changes in the past 6 months. Pandemic funding being cut. The World Health Organization underfunded. The Center for Disease Control in the US actively undermined. Data not being shared, science stalled, and some critical reports are not being released. And just 2 weeks ago, the US Health Secretary, Secretary Kennedy, announced that all US funding for Gavi will be stopped. Gavi is the Global Vaccine Alliance. It is a global public-private partnership that aims to increase access to vaccines in the world's poorest countries. The impact of all this will be felt. On 30 June, just 2 weeks ago, an estimate was published in The Lancet showing that unless these sudden funding cuts from the first half of 2025 are reversed, we could see up to 14 million avoidable deaths by the year 2030. 14 million additional deaths that could have been prevented. That is a staggering number, far exceeding the death tolls from both the Middle East conflicts and the Russian invasion of Ukraine going on in the moment. And most of these deaths will be among children. Let's be honest. The divide isn't just about politics. It's also deeply personal. The COVID pandemic, and especially the issue of vaccines, caused deep divisions, not just between countries or political parties, but also within communities, within churches, within families, also within Christian families. That, to me, was the hardest part of it all. After almost 2 decades in Singapore, I now live in Switzerland. And the ICMDA affiliate in Switzerland is called AGEAS. And we in AGEAS organized a weekend seminar, which is called Corona Trend, Jesus eint, Corona, COVID divides, Christ unifies. And the theme was, how can we communicate, even within Christian communities and churches or families, when we hold stark opposing opinions? How do we heal after these deep rifts? Much healing is still needed within our communities, within our churches, within our families. And I hope many more such seminars will take place through ICMDA and beyond. At the heart of our Christian faith is compassion. That's how Harvard started the introduction. And even in pandemics, or perhaps especially then, we are called to care. That's our moral duty. Thank you for listening.
Many thanks, Annelies. That's really very challenging and so much information there. I apologize now for rushing over your introduction because there's so much information you've shared from your personal experience and your expertise in this area over 20 years, but that certainly came through in the presentation. So we have some questions that I'll refer to. I'd just like to kick off, Annelies, by asking you from your worldwide experience, which countries do you think handled COVID the best? And what can we learn from those countries?
Yeah, the answer is quite straightforward here. Countries in Asia fared best, especially countries that had already faced the SARS outbreak or later also MERS. They were prepared. They were scientifically prepared, but also they were prepared in terms of community awareness and acceptance. Also countries where maybe governments have a little bit more of a vertical program, so they can quickly implement drastic measures. And then of course countries that are islands that can protect themselves maybe had an easier path to making sure that no virus would be introduced. Sadly, in this case, for this pandemic, Europe and the US fared relatively badly. We were slow to react. Democracy by itself is good, but slows down some of the processes. But I think what overall slowed down the whole response was, of course, very confusing and a conflicting messaging that often came also from leadership.
I remember when you spoke earlier on in the COVID crisis, your real concern about countering fake news and how it had taken WHO by surprise. So the science is going well, but the social is a real challenge, and how frustrating that was. There's a question here that says, thank you for the Christian and biblical context of your talk. I've met many intelligent Christians who, since the pandemic, have become general vaccine skeptics, seemingly unable or unprepared to be convinced by the data, at the same time benefiting from others who have been vaccinated. Do you have any views on why vaccine skepticism has found a seemingly ready soil in Christian circles, maybe as part of general distrust of the world and the intentions of those around us?
This is a truly hard question, and a question I've been struggling with myself. Of course, various factors converge that came together that has resulted in this outcome. One of those being social media, and social media, causes these algorithms where you then receive information that is then tailored to what you have racial interests. So now the algorithms are all built that you get more and more information in that direction. So overall, over time, then we had different echo chambers and so people listening to a totally different set of facts compared to others. And I think that was the hardest. So if people look at the same facts and have different opinions, that's one thing. But now with these social media echo chambers that echo and amplify certain messages, it was now almost, it polarized us, and we couldn't crosstalk, because I would say something to someone and they would not even understand because they didn't have the background that I now have, and vice versa. Because of that, I actually started listening to some of this, so I would understand what is going on. The second, I think I'm still trying to learn, but I do believe that part of the end times, whenever end time starts, is deception. And I think spiritually we can be deceived, and we need to be humble, back to the word, back to the facts, to unpack what happened to some of the churches in the past 2 years. The third, I think, is obviously there was confusing messaging, and even well-meaning people were then misled. But in that mix, where people who intentionally wanted to cause disruption, and intentionally wanted to polarize and cause problems and strife. So we are in a fallen world, and we Christians are part of this. And I think together we now need to do a real debrief as a church. What happened? Why were we even within ourselves divided when we should have together addressed this problem to save lives? And what happened that drove us apart, even within families, that can now be that we really should have, I don't know what the right word is, made like an autopsy. We have, a debrief, and really try to work through these issues and resolve it. Because if we don't address it now, they will all come back with the next crisis.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think we're all so happy to put it behind us and just get on with the new freedoms that we have again after all the restrictions. But you're right, we do need to think it through, particularly the churches. I noticed, was it a couple of weeks ago, that the Scientific Advisory Group on the Origins of Novel Pathogens, I think shortened to SAGO, they've been looking at the origin of COVID-19. And there's a question from Gregory Gardner, which has had a few upticks, which says, would you like to comment on the letter sent to the Lancet by the Eco Health Alliance, saying that the idea of the COVID-19 virus coming from the Wuhan lab was a conspiracy theory? What's your thinking on that?
So at this time of the discussions around the origin, which is an important question, because if you know the origin, then you can also prevent the next pandemic, is unfortunately driven 150% or 1,000% by politics, and the science has unfortunately been cornered. My answer is bring the science out, listen to the virologists who understand that cleavage issue, who understand what spillover means, and give them the megaphone, not the politicians. In short, I don't think we'll have a conclusive answer where the origin is. But the scientific evidence, in my view, and I rely more on the virologists, points more towards a natural spillover. Similar to SARS, we never found the true origin of SARS. We know there were some intermediate steps, and then we were able to contain it, and it's now eradicated. But also there, initially, there was also a lab around there. So in short, I cannot give you a conclusive answer. I tend to lean towards a natural source. I am definitely against any conspiracy that goes into deliberate creation. I think that is absolute rubbish. China would not want to shoot themselves into their foot. And unfortunately, also the fact that this whole thing came back out after the recent change in administration in the US shows how politicized this is. And we need to step away, go back to the science.
And just having a brief scan of the report, it said that they couldn't be conclusive, but there was quite a bit of information that had been withheld that would either have proved or disproved it one way or the other. I don't know if you're aware of that, but that, I suppose, continues to feed the conspiracy theory, and also feeds the comment that you made that this is 1,000% political.
Yes, and there are still some more reports, intelligence reports coming out from the CIA, and also Germany is working on one. So I think we should wait for those as well. But this is, I am not going to listen to a lawyer or politician. This is a scientific question, and I think we need to take the virologists more seriously. Don't corner them. Silence as scientists.
You gave us that very useful graph on the difference between Biden and Trump supporters. There's a question from Gregory Gardner that's been upticked that says America had a natural experiment in that some states had very stringent lockdown measures. Some states were much more relaxed. There did not seem to be a clear pattern supporting the spread of the virus according to the degree of stringency. Would you agree with this?
Yeah, so we probably would need to go very carefully into the details. The problem is you cannot do total head-to-head comparisons. For example, Sweden, as a country, never had a full lockdown and had higher deaths than its neighboring countries with a lockdown, but not the worst case scenario. But many reasons are Sweden by itself is not very densely populated. Swedish people as a culture, they don't kiss as much as, for example, Italians. So there are many confounding factors that have to be taken into when you make comparisons. I would like to encourage Dr. Gregory to look at this Oxford Stringency Index. It's a tracker. It's very open data. They tracked more than 100 criteria, and it is relatively clear cut. Not always in every single little detail, that the more stringent you wear, the better your outcome. The same, there's lots of confusion about the face masks. Face mask itself, especially if used inconsistently and wrongly, can never offer 100% protection. So community-based approaches like community-based community use of face masks will never have the best efficacy. But it's still a protection that may be around 30% on a population level, maybe 40%, which is better than nothing. And during a pandemic where you don't have a single vertical program like vaccines, you have to have a combined approach of various factors, and then try to choose what is the most acceptable to people and what is the least damaging to mental health and economics. And all of us, every country, played around different variations, and it's very interesting to learn and see what they did. And we cannot in the end come to one final single solution. What we have learned is social distancing works, face masks do work, altogether, they did have something, but we really want to get out of this, and so vaccination is still the best answer. But it takes a long time, as we now know, to develop a vaccine. It's not only development, but then also to roll it out quickly. It took 2 years to get really high global uptake.
Well, as I expected, the questions are piling in. I think I've tried to squeeze in two more. One's a quick one relating to what you've just been saying. How do you explain low mortality rates in poor, low vaccinated countries? Well, there's a big assumption there, but how do you explain low mortality rates in poor, low vaccinated countries?
So in Africa, we saw relatively low mortality rates, and there are very good explanations for that. First of all, the demographics. As we all know, COVID affected older people and people with obesity and underlying comorbidities, which presents about 30% of the populations in high-income countries. In low middle-income countries, especially the very poor, this only presents 5%. So by definition, in high-income countries, we would see many, many more deaths. That's one reason. The second reason is the population density is lower. And the population density is in itself, and I published on this, is one of the main driving factors for the rapid spread of COVID. And the third, you wouldn't believe it, but Africa was actually better trained in public health measures. And they, in fact, had masks earlier than, for example, my country, Switzerland, at the time. So I think the combination of these factors explain why we saw relatively few deaths in Africa, where the mean age is so much younger than for example, in the US.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thanks for that. One last question. I love your analogy of the Formula One wheel change getting quicker and quicker. Having had the British Grand Prix this weekend, you just look on in amazement when they managed to change those tyres in 2 seconds. Takes me probably a whole day. But it says, the last question, how do you feel standby vaccine preparedness planning for possible future pandemics sits with the dependent mindset of take therefore no thought for the morrow?
Yes. So I can't cite it immediately, but in Proverbs or somewhere it's the fool who doesn't prepare for the future. Right? So we have both Bible verses. One that says you get the manna today and only look for today, but there's also Bible verses that clearly say if you're fool or lazy, you will not be prepared for your future, your old age, or for illnesses. So I go shopping to prepare for the next week. I am putting money into my pension fund, so I have money for my retirement. And the same is for pandemic preparedness. The cost of this pandemic, as you all know, is in the trillions. On top of educational costs, mental health costs, etc. We don't want this to happen again.
Well, sadly, Annelies, we come to the end of our time. I've found it both a joy and a privilege to be taking part in this. I learned so much, as always, and I'm sure all the participants will have learned so much from your expertise, your wisdom, and your knowledge in this particular area. So a particular thanks to you, Annelies. Thanks to everyone who's taken part and for all your questions. Apologies if we didn't get to your question, but hopefully you'll be able to tune in next week at the same time. Thanks again. God bless.
Thank you. God bless.